Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold. I never understood that expression until I lived it. My name is Ethan Hayes, and this is the story of how I dismantled my cheating wife's perfect life without raising my voice even once. If you think this is a tale of blind rage or violent outbursts, you're mistaken. This is something far more deliberate, far more controlled. This is what happens when betrayal meets patience. If this story resonates with you, share it to help grow the Whispered Truths channel. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone in our darkest moments is enough to help us through them. 8 years ago, I married Olivia Campbell. She was brilliant, ambitious, and I thought, honest. We met at a charity gala in Portland, two young professionals with bright futures ahead. I was climbing the ranks at a respected architecture firm, while she was making waves at a PR agency. Our courtship was effortless. Our wedding was featured in a local lifestyle magazine. Everyone called us the perfect power couple, and for a while, we were. We built a life that seemed impressive from every angle. A modernist home in Portland's West Hills with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting. We hosted dinner parties where guests would comment on our complimentary wine selections and finishing each other's sentences. Our vacations were meticulously planned adventures to places that looked good on social media, but also felt meaningful to us, or so I thought. Olivia had exquisite taste, and I had the financial means to support it. We were building something together, a partnership, a future, a legacy. 5 years into our marriage, we experienced a devastating miscarriage. It changed Olivia in ways I couldn't fully comprehend at the time. She withdrew, poured herself into her work, stayed later at the office. I gave her space, believing that grief manifests differently in everyone. I supported her choices, never questioning her need to process pain in her own way. I thought we would eventually find our way back to each other. I thought our foundation was strong enough to weather any storm. I was wrong. The day everything changed started normally enough. I was supposed to go on a fishing trip with my best friend Jason, a tradition we'd maintained since college. Jason is a single dad, and his son had come down with the flu, so he had to cancel at the last minute. I decided to surprise Olivia with an impromptu date night, her favorite sushi, and an expensive bottle of wine she'd been wanting to try. She had mentioned having a small girls' night at our house, but I figured I could drop off the food and wine as a gesture before making myself scarce. Maybe catch a movie alone or get some work done at a coffee shop. I remember the weather that evening, unusually warm for Portland in April, the kind of spring evening that feels like a premature summer. I had loosened my tie and rolled up my sleeves as I drove home, windows down, thinking about how nice it would be to sit on our back deck with Olivia once her friends left. Maybe reconnect a little. We'd been ships passing in the night lately, both busy with big projects at work. What struck me first when I pulled into our driveway was the unfamiliar red Audi parked across the street. Not one of Olivia's usual friends' cars. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual for Olivia, who was almost paranoid about home security. Music drifted from our backyard, not the indie folk Olivia typically played during her gatherings, but something more upbeat, more celebratory. And then there was the smell of cigarettes. Olivia had supposedly quit years ago, making a big show of how she couldn't stand the smell anymore. Something primitive inside me said to move silently, to not announce my presence. It was the first time I listened to that voice, the one telling me something wasn't right. I wish I could say it was wrong. Instead of going through the front door, I walked around to the side gate that led to our backyard. I could hear female laughter, glasses clinking. Normal sounds for a girls' night. But as I approached, staying near the shadows of the tall wooden fence that surrounded our property, I heard Olivia's voice, louder than usual, loosened by alcohol. "I've been sleeping with Benjamin for 3 years, and he still brings home flowers every anniversary," she slurred, wine glass tilted dangerously. I froze in place. Benjamin Carter, the strategy director from a competing agency. A man who had been in our home, eaten at our table. A man who had shaken my hand and commented on my whiskey collection. The women shrieked with laughter, but Olivia wasn't finished. "The night before his father's funeral," she leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, but still audible from my position. "I spent the evening with Benjamin. When I got home, I pretended I had food poisoning. Ethan actually made me soup." More laughter. One voice, I think it belonged to her friend Melissa, asked, "Doesn't he suspect anything?" "God, no," Olivia replied, with something like pride in her voice. "He's so trusting it's almost boring. He thinks I'm working late when I'm with Benjamin. Sometimes I don't even bother to hide the hotel charges on our credit card. I just tell him it was a client lunch, and he never questions it." I remember looking down at the bag of sushi and the bottle of wine in my hands. There was a moment of disconnect, like I was floating outside my body, watching myself stand there like a statue while my life imploded. I don't remember making the decision to walk away, but suddenly I was back in my car, keys in the ignition, driving nowhere in particular. Have you ever had that gut feeling something wasn't right in your relationship? That moment when instinct screams louder than reason? I'd ignored mine for years, explaining away late nights, missed calls, emotional distance. Sometimes I wonder how different my life would be if I'd listened sooner. I drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes. I ended up in a Target parking lot, parked at the far end, where the lights barely reached. I sat there, a ghost in my own body, staring at nothing. The dashboard clock read 10:24 p.m. I'd been driving for over an hour, yet it seemed like only minutes had passed since I'd stood behind that wooden fence, listening to my wife destroy our marriage with a wine-soaked laugh. Thoughts raced through my mind like wild animals. 3 years. 3 years of deception. That meant it started shortly after our miscarriage. While I was giving her space to grieve, she was creating space for an affair. I thought about all the anniversaries, birthdays, Christmases, moments I thought were sacred to us that had been undermined by her duplicity. I thought about making her soup the night before my father's funeral. I'd been so worried about her, so focused on making sure she was comfortable, despite my own grief. And she'd just come from being with him. The depth of betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just the physical infidelity, it was the mockery. The fact that she laughed about it with her friends, that my love and trust were punchlines to her jokes, that she took pride in how effectively she'd deceived me. I don't know how long I sat in that parking lot, but eventually, the lights at Target went out. The last employees walked to their cars. And still I sat, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I'd married with, the one who could betray me so completely. Somewhere around midnight, something shifted inside me. The initial shock began to crystallize into something colder, more focused. I realized I had two choices. I could confront her immediately, unleash my pain and anger in a dramatic scene that would give her the upper hand in controlling the narrative of our breakup. Or I could be strategic. I chose strategy. I slept in my car that night, reclined in the driver's seat with my jacket as a makeshift pillow. I woke at dawn with a clarity I hadn't expected. I went to a 24-hour diner, ordered coffee and eggs, and mapped out my approach. By the time I returned home, I had a plan. Olivia was in the kitchen when I walked in, making coffee, looking slightly hungover but otherwise normal. She smiled when she saw me, the same smile I'd woken up to for 8 years. "You're home. I was worried. Where were you?" "Jason's son got better, so we went ahead with the fishing trip. I thought I texted you," I lied smoothly. "My phone died, and I crashed at his place. How was girls' night?" "Oh, just wine and gossip," she said, kissing my cheek. "Nothing exciting." I nodded, accepting her lie with one of my own. And so began the most challenging performance of my life. I became the world's most committed actor. I slipped into the role of oblivious husband, with a dedication that would have impressed the most demanding director. I asked about her work projects, picked up her favorite Thai food on Tuesdays, massaged her shoulders when she complained about tension from sitting at her desk all day. But now I saw everything. The way she guarded her phone, the unexplained absences, the work events that couldn't be verified, the lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne, the slight shift in her demeanor after certain text messages. For 3 weeks, I maintained this facade while simultaneously preparing for what would come next. I photographed credit card statements showing hotel charges. I saved text messages where she'd lied about her whereabouts. I copied emails from our shared computer where she'd arranged meetings with Benjamin. I documented everything methodically, creating an irrefutable record of her betrayal. I consulted with a divorce attorney, not just any attorney, but Natalie Grant, nicknamed the Guillotine for her ruthless approach to high-asset divorces. I moved money into accounts that couldn't be immediately accessed by Olivia. I secured our most important financial documents. I researched Benjamin Carter and discovered he was married to a woman named Rebecca, who worked as a pediatric surgeon. For 3 weeks, I played the part of devoted husband while systematically preparing to dismantle Olivia's entire world. And then, on a Thursday evening, I made the single phone call that would set everything in motion. What would you have done in my position? Would you have chosen silent revenge like I did, or confronted your spouse immediately? There's no right answer, but sometimes the path of patience reveals more truth than a moment of confrontation ever could. The call was to Rebecca Carter. I didn't immediately tell her about the affair. Instead, I suggested a coffee meeting to discuss a potential charity collaboration. When we met at a quiet cafe across town, I was struck by her warmth and intelligence. She spoke lovingly of Benjamin, of their plans to start a family. My resolve wavered momentarily. Was I about to destroy another person's happiness? But then I remembered Olivia's laughter as she recounted making a fool of me, and I knew Rebecca deserved the truth just as much as I did. I showed her the evidence carefully, compassionately. Her reaction was nothing like mine. Where I had gone cold and calculating, Rebecca became incandescent with rage. She thanked me, gathered her things, and left the cafe with purpose in her stride. I didn't know what she planned to do with the information, but I suspected Benjamin's world was about to implode. Mine and Olivia's carefully choreographed dance continued for another week. She was preparing for the biggest event of her career, a gala launching a new campaign for her agency's most important client. She'd been working on it for months, and the success of the event would likely determine her next promotion. The gala was scheduled for Friday evening. On Thursday night, I executed the final phase of my plan. With Natalie's guidance, I had prepared a comprehensive divorce filing that would leave Olivia with virtually nothing. Our prenuptial agreement had a strong infidelity clause that Olivia had insisted on. Ironic, considering she was the one who had violated it. I had also prepared a detailed dossier of her affair, including timelines, photographs, and financial records. While Olivia was at her final planning meeting for the gala, I sent carefully crafted emails to her boss, her client, and Benjamin's wife. Each email contained different pieces of evidence, enough to be convincing but not so much as to seem vindictive. To her boss, I included evidence of how she had charged personal rendezvous with Benjamin to company expenses. To her client, I included screenshots of texts where she had mocked their brand and marketing strategy while pretending enthusiasm to their face. To Benjamin's wife, I sent additional evidence I had gathered, including a recent hotel receipt. Within minutes, Olivia's phone began buzzing incessantly, calls, texts, emails cascading in like an avalanche. I drove home calmly, placed the divorce papers Natalie had drawn up in a cream-colored envelope on the dining table, and walked through our house one last time. I took only what was irreplaceably mine: my father's watch, photo albums from before I met Olivia, a few personal mementos. Everything else could be sorted through lawyers. When Olivia walked through our front door that evening, she had no idea that her carefully constructed life was about to shatter into a million pieces. The envelope waiting for her on the dining table wasn't just divorce papers. It was evidence of a betrayal so complete that no explanation could ever justify it. I was sitting in the living room, a glass of the expensive scotch she had given me for Christmas in hand. She burst in, makeup streaked with tears, phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. "I've done exactly what you taught me to do," I replied calmly. "I learned from the best, after all. You showed me how to smile while deceiving someone. You showed me how to look someone in the eye while undermining everything they believe in. I just applied the lesson. My client canceled the gala, she said, as if I might not understand the magnitude of what had happened. My boss has suspended me pending an investigation. Benjamin's wife showed up at our planning meeting and caused a scene. Everything is ruined. Yes, I agreed simply. Everything is ruined. She looked at the envelope on the table, then back at me. How long have you known? Long enough to ensure that when I left I'd never have to look back. She broke then, not gracefully, but in jagged pieces. Tears streamed down her face as she fell to her knees, clutching at my hand. I was wrong. I was drunk. I didn't mean it. We can fix this. You weren't drunk, I cut her off, my voice even. You were proud. You boasted. You laughed at what you thought was stupidity but was actually love. Please, she begged, her voice small and desperate. 8 years, Ethan. 8 years can't end like this. It ended 3 years ago, I corrected her. You just didn't bother to tell me. I stood up then, draining the last of my scotch. The papers are fairly straightforward. The prenup you insisted on works heavily in my favor given the circumstances. Your attorney can contact Natalie Grant if there are questions, but I wouldn't recommend trying to contest anything. The evidence is comprehensive. She switched tactics then, anger replacing anguish. You planned this, she accused. You've been plotting this for weeks, pretending everything was normal while setting me up for this ambush. How is that any different from what I did? I looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her. This woman I had loved, this stranger I now barely recognized. The difference is that I never promised to be faithful to your betrayal. You promised to be faithful to my love. I walked out then, closing the door on her protests and recriminations. I checked into a hotel downtown and slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The aftermath was predictably messy. Olivia tried every approach to change the outcome. Tearful phone calls, angry emails, nostalgic text messages about our happy memories, even showing up at my office with lunch to talk. I maintained my most powerful weapon, silence. I communicated only through Natalie, who handled everything with ruthless efficiency. Benjamin disappeared from Olivia's life the moment his wife confronted him. He valued his marriage and career more than his affair, it seemed. Olivia's professional reputation was in tatters. Word travels fast in Portland's tightly knit business community. The divorce was finalized in record time, thanks to the prenup and Natalie's aggressive approach. 6 months later, I moved into a downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, a space Olivia had never entered, decorated in ways she had never influenced. I began dating again, cautiously at first, then with more confidence. I found I enjoyed the company of women who were direct, honest, uninterested in games or appearances. I started a new tradition of weekend hikes instead of dinner parties, finding more satisfaction in muddy boots and trail conversations than in polished small talk over wine. I ran into Olivia only once after the divorce was finalized. It was at a coffee shop in a neighborhood neither of us frequented. She looked different. Humbler somehow, less polished, but more real than I'd seen her in years. We acknowledged each other with nods. As I was leaving, she stopped me. I'm moving to Chicago next week, she said. Fresh start. I nodded, unsure what response she was looking for. I'm sorry, she added, looking me directly in the eye for perhaps the first time since I'd known her. Not for getting caught, for everything, for the person I was, for what I did to you. You deserved better. I considered her words for a moment. Yes, I agreed simply. I did. We didn't hug or shake hands. There was nothing more to say. I walked away, and that night, I deleted all the evidence I had gathered of her betrayal. I no longer needed proof of what she had done. I no longer needed to revisit that pain. I am not the Ethan who once suffered betrayal. I am not the Ethan who engineered a calculated response. I am Ethan Hayes, the author of my own story. Olivia lost everything: her career, her friends, her finances, her lover, and her reputation. Not because I shattered her, but because I allowed her to collapse under the weight of her own choices. I never needed to witness her suffering. I only needed to stop seeing her reflection in my mirror each morning. People often ask if I regret how I handled things, if I wish I'd confronted her immediately, if I wish I'd tried to save our marriage, if I wish I'd been less coldly methodical in my response. The truth is, I don't. Betrayal of that magnitude doesn't deserve the dignity of a heated confrontation. It doesn't deserve tears or shouting or broken plates. It deserves exactly what I gave it: calculated consequences. When trust is broken beyond repair, there's no dialogue that can restore it. There are only the choices we make about how to move forward. I chose to ensure that my new beginning wasn't tainted by allowing her any control over how our ending unfolded. It wasn't about revenge, though it may seem that way. It was about reclaiming the narrative of my life from someone who had treated it as a subplot in hers. There's a certain peace in knowing that you've faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged not just intact but stronger, more discerning, more authentic. I no longer need the trappings of what others consider success. I no longer need to curate my life for public consumption. I'm building something new, something true. And this time, I'm the only one holding the blueprint. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to Whispered Truths. Every week we share real stories of betrayal and healing that remind us we're never alone in our darkest moments. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply tell our truth, however messy or uncomfortable it might be. In sharing our stories, we find not just catharsis, but community. We find the strength to write new chapters, ones where betrayal isn't the defining moment of our lives, but merely a plot point we've moved beyond.